welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. So here on the podcast for today, we have Dana DiTomaso joining us. Did I pronounce that right, Dana?
You did. Congratulations.
Awesome. I, too, have an interesting name, so I always like to check in. Really stoked that you can join us today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are, what your business is about, and what brought you there?
Yeah, so I'm president partner at Kickpoint. We're a digital marketing agency based in Edmonton, Alberta. And unlike you out on the West Coast, it's snowing here today. So that's, it's one thing that happens in Edmonton a lot is you spend a lot of time inside because it's a long, cold winter. And that means that there's a lot of digital marketing agencies here for some odd reason, probably related to the winter. So one of the things that's cool about Edmonton is that it's a small town, but there's also lots of people who are interested in what we do. And so I actually met, when I moved here 8 years ago now, I met my business partner, Jen, through a mutual friend, and Kickpoint started to grow. And now we're at a team of 8, and we do things from websites and branding to helping companies do digital marketing better, helping them with AdWords, writing, basically all aspects and facets of digital marketing. And a lot of what we focus on is helping people do stuff better. Because typically, especially companies who have an in-house team, they're doing things and they think they're okay, but they definitely think they could be better. And that's where we come in. And we'll help train them on what they need to do instead of the stuff that they've been trying that may not have been working out so well for them, and stuff that they could be doing better, and make suggestions, and a lot of reporting, which is actually how you and I met as I was giving a talk at reporting at U Summit. And one thing that's really important to us is making sure that the reports that we provide are clear, that we're explaining everything, and that we're not hiding behind, some marketing, nice sounding BS on how everything is improving when actually they're not making more money. So we do really try to be extremely clear in what we do. And for my history, I've been working in digital marketing for 18 years now. Before this, I worked as a technical support in dial-up internet service provider in the late 90s. I worked in software companies as a technical writer. And then I was working at a customer relationship management software company, and I got laid off. And I used my layoff money to teach myself web design. This was in 2000. And my very first client, who I launched a website for, said to me, "Okay, how do I get on Google?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll get back to you." And 18 years later, here we are.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I can imagine, coming from tech support, technical writing, these are places where communication is critical, but not always easy. So what are some of the kind of communication issues that you've come up against on your journey?
Yeah, I would find that, honestly, especially in the beginning of SEO, search engine optimization, because that's really where my foundation started, was in SEO. A lot of people try to make it complicated and pretend that it's some sort of black magic that we're doing. And, it's all mysterious and there's no way you could possibly do any of this to just keep the bills going. And I think that's something that is really a disservice to our field, because it's not rocket science. Like, we're not saving babies here, right? We're marketing. And when it comes to things, particularly with SEO, absolutely there's an element of creativity in terms of how you would build links or how you set up pages or the content you create. That idea part of it is really important, but really there's also the day-to-day stuff that you just need to do. And there's nothing that would stop anyone really from learning how to do this. We all had to learn at some point. And so I think by hiding the inner workings of SEO or social media marketing or any other facet of digital marketing, I think we do ourselves and clients a disservice by trying to hide that. And I think a lot of people do that because they're afraid that if the clients find out how to do this, they'll start doing it themselves. And our philosophy is if the client has time to do it themselves, and they should, because it is cheaper than paying us, and we will teach them how to do it. And then, you've got a client for life because you've taught them how to fish, essentially. And really, for some companies, they don't have time to do it, but they want to understand the how and the why. And I think that's a really important thing that some companies do themselves a disservice by refusing to, share those details. And the client is just wondering, well, what am I paying you for if you can't tell me what it is? Because it's not tangible. There's a great book called Selling the Invisible that was written before quite a while ago. I think it's a 20-year-old book now, maybe older. But it's about selling stuff that can't be touched. It's easy when there's a house and you can see it go up and you understand the different elements of a house. But when it comes to things like a website, it's just this intangible thing until it appears on someone's screen. And with search engine optimization, it's even worse because you're ranking number 3, but I Googled it and I'm number 6. So what are you doing over there? And I think that's where being extremely clear and willing to communicate ideas and the concepts and exactly what you're doing to your clients can really help you in the long run have a client relationship that's built on trust instead of secrets.
Okay. So what I'm hearing here is that you run up against quite often in the industry where people are almost afraid to communicate kind of what's going on behind the scenes. And you've really found that has kind of smoothed the way in your work that you're doing, because it's less about, am I here on my pedestal doing things that you don't know about, and more about, can you see the value in what I'm doing? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are really they equate the what I'm doing with the this is the method in which I'm doing, and they really think that that a lot of this is secrets and we can't let this out, but you can. And I mean, we all go to conferences and we find out secrets. Some things, the new methodology of doing something that's pretty cool, and you can tell a client about it and say, I haven't talked about this yet, or we're not going to blog about it yet because it is working really well. We don't want your competition to find out. But there's a lot of accepted methodologies in our industry and how to do stuff. There's nothing stopping you from sharing that with your clients and what you're going to be doing.
Okay, and so once you kind of decided that you were going to be sharing these sorts of information, you mentioned things like breaking it down in clear, simple ways.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the kind of pitfalls you've experienced trying to share stuff that you know a lot about and maybe the client doesn't know so much about? And what are some of the ways you've overcome that?
Yeah, I think particularly because I've been doing this for an extremely long time, sometimes I can get really deep into something. And I think that that's where, in particular, actually, my business partner is quite good at, giving me a little nudge and saying, you've gone too far, dial it back for this client. But over the years, I've definitely gotten better at judging where a client might be in their understanding and scaling my language to that. And really, it's just practice. And we'll also ask clients, what have you done in the past? How familiar are you with this? Tell us how you describe your goals, or tell us how you describe the marketing that you've done in the past. And that's a really good gauge for us, because a more technical client will say things like, I'm really worried about site speed. Or, I understand that these pages are loading slowly. Or they can say things like, my site doesn't seem to come up very well. Why is that? And that's really an indicator for us in terms of their level of technological sophistication. And sometimes I can have extremely nerdy conversations with a developer at a client site. And sometimes the client had a developer who got fired because they were terrible and we're taking it over, and they literally have no idea, but here's some logins, good luck. And so we really have to have a lot of different levels of conversations with clients. But hopefully by the time they've finished working with us, they do have a deeper understanding of all these different pieces, even if not every client has gone from 0 to 10, maybe they went from 0 to 3, but that's fine. As long as we're improving their knowledge a little bit, it doesn't have to be, every client has to be, an expert by the time we're done with this. Whatever their comfort level is, that's what we want to educate them to.
Okay, this is really, really intriguing to me. Some of the things that I'm hearing include that, you are not necessarily dumbing down, pardon the expression, what you're talking about, but more so it's an interactive process where you're gauging where the client is at, what they know already, and then matching your terminology and your kind of level of technical, how deep you're getting onto more of the technical side of things according to where they're at. I'm also hearing that there's a lot of education going on, but that's not your core focus. You're not trying to make them an expert. You're just trying to give the context that they need to understand what you're saying. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. They need to be able to understand why we're making the decisions that we're making. And I hate the phrase dumbing down, because there's nothing wrong with explaining things in plain language. at all. And I think that that's something that we've generally as a society, we have failed to explain things clearly to people. And that's why we have such a gap now when it comes to things like science education. When we're talking about things like, vaccination issues or climate change, and people don't understand or feel that the experts are lying, well, it's because people have treated it like these people are dumb and we have to explain it to them in simple words. It means no, they just don't have the same context as you. And extending this back into client relations again, there's something when people say, oh, well, the client doesn't get it. Well, yeah, because you didn't explain it to them in a way that made sense to them. And I think that that's important, to meet someone halfway or even more than halfway if they're approaching it from a different direction than you, to make sure that they understand why you're doing stuff. The client isn't going to get it if you don't explain why they should get it. And I think that that's something where agencies will make fun of a client and say, oh, that client, they're so dumb, blah, blah, blah. But they wouldn't have called you if everything was great. So yeah, you do need to make sure that the client does get it at some level, or else they're going to stop working with you, because people know when you think they're dumb. And why would you want to work with an agency that thinks that you're dumb?
Absolutely. Obviously you can't see me, but I'm doing some heavy nodding. I'm like, oh yeah, this is gold. And really what I'm hearing is that simplifying things for somebody else's benefit, not only does it work for both of your benefits, but that's not the same thing as dumbing it down, assuming that they're dumb, or, that's not something that is negative or needs to have negative connotations. In fact, what I'm hearing from you is quite the opposite, is that it's very necessary to build the sort of mutual relationship with your client where they're understanding why you're making decisions and understanding how you're achieving goals, instead of just, going totally hands off and just trusting you blindly, which, while that might define some relationships, is not the ideal client relationship, because the balance of power is not equal. That's kind of what I don't know if I'm...
No, I think that's a good point. And I think that at some point you say, oh, well, they can trust me completely. For example, I have a client that I've worked with for must be at least actually since almost the beginning. So maybe 17, 18 years now. And he has a flyer distribution business. This is back in Ontario where I lived originally. And he runs a pet kennel. And we don't do anything for the flyer business anymore. It's sort of a side business for him, but we actively work on AdWords for the pet kennel. And he's the first person to admit that he doesn't know this stuff. But because over the years, and we've worked together a really long time, I've given him honest, straightforward answers and honest, straightforward advice and explained why I'm making the decisions that I'm making. He's a client for life and he trusts me. And I think that that's something really important. If I had ever given him some BS and somebody else later had said, well, no, that's not how that works. And, that's where doubt comes into a client's mind. And I think it's really important to be honest, even if the advice isn't great. And this is the other thing too, is that idea that clients have to have good, hear good things all the time. You can't possibly deliver them bad news. Well, that's also how you end up in a bad relationship. Honesty works both ways. It isn't just good honesty, but it has to be bad honesty as well, such as, we tried this, it didn't work, we're going to do this instead. And I think that that's just as important in a relationship. And yeah, maybe sometimes you're not the best fit for the client. And it's important to say, look, we're trying all this stuff and it isn't working out. Can I refer you to somebody else? That's one of the most honest things you can do. And financially, sure, yeah, it's scary. You never want to turn away a client. But at the same time, if they're not a good fit, then don't spend your time on that. There's another agency who can really help them out instead. And I think that's where some of that honesty can come in as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember this was something that really spoke to me at U Summit when you were talking about reports. You talked about making sure that the reports are, first of all, aligned with goals. And second of all, using messaging that they understand in the reports. You mentioned that metrics are things that can be fudged, but if you're putting it in language that the clients understand, then that goes a long way towards help giving them that context as to why something was successful or unsuccessful. But I'd love to learn a little bit more, for our listeners who want to be honest and they want to talk about the bad things, but maybe it's a little bit scary or they're not sure how. What are some things that you've learned on your own journey in terms of how you communicate that have helped you kind of either bridge that scary gap, or kind of tips you can give about having those harder conversations?
I think the biggest thing is just to start having them. Pick a client that you trust the most or someone that you trust the most, and that's a good person to start with. And also usually before I'll have a conversation with a client about something, I will talk it through with someone else who is not an expert at this particular subject. And because at the office, for example, I do a lot of the reporting and a lot of the deeper technical stuff. So I'll talk to someone who isn't necessarily as technical and talk them through the rationale. And if they get it, then great. This is something that I can explain to the client in this way. And I think that that's just the best way to do it, is just get started. Something that we've also done at our agency is we don't have account managers. Everybody talks to clients. And I think that's something that is nice, because then you don't have this wall of, oh, we need to protect the creatives. They can't possibly talk to the client, but everybody has to talk to the client. So that way everybody is keeping the client's issues forefront and everybody knows the client. So someone who's working with us might end up talking to, say, almost the entire team at some point, but it means that we all know the client really well. And someone will call in and be like, oh yeah, Carol was asking this. And because everybody knows who she is and her struggles at her business and what she likes, what she doesn't like, and what her focus is and her goals, everybody's got that understanding. And so we're able to come to solutions a lot faster, because we don't need to be briefed on the background, or we've never met this person and they're just some sort of fictional client off in the distance. And I think that makes the relationships a lot more real. And really, when you have a deeper relationship with someone, of course, you want to be honest with them, and in real life and in agency life as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And what I'm hearing here is that you guys have all the different people who might be touching a project. Conversation is on the table. You don't have this one person who is the gateway that all of the information filters through. And what I'm hearing is that has benefits on both sides. It has benefits for the people who are working on it, because they have that closer sense of connection and a sense of the stakes too. And I'm hearing that benefits the client as well on a bunch of different levels, because the client's problems are more forefront and more intimate for the people who are working with them, as well as, they have that sense of trust that you were talking about. They have that sense of honesty, knowing that there isn't kind of a spin doctor who is going to be buffering between them and the people who are actually doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a great fit for every client because of that too. Some people are just used to the traditional agency method where they just talk to an account manager and they throw money at the problem and they don't have to be involved in the solution. And we're not a good fit for those types of people who want that kind of relationship. And also, we're pretty honest and upfront about that too. There's actually a whole page, our section on our process page, about honesty and why we're honest and what that means for our relationships with our clients. And I think that's something where you have to have an understanding of how you work as an agency, what you're comfortable with. Maybe the account manager methodology is the way you want to work, and that's great. There's a place for that, and there's a place for how we do things as well. And I think that that's where you just have to decide which methodology you're comfortable with, and then be honest with your clients. This is how it's going to work, and lay it out for them. Often when we end up having people come to us with other agencies, the stories that they tell are things like, I was working with this person and then we had 4 different account managers in a year and it felt like they weren't taking care of us. That's really common. Or things like, I was told this and then we ended up with this. Or situations where, for example, where we've ended a relationship with a client because it wasn't working out, because they ended up coming in saying, oh yeah, I'm ready to learn. I don't need an account manager. I'm ready to work with you. And then it turns out that actually they would really benefit from having an account manager and they really didn't want to necessarily learn or do any of the work. And in that case, we'll refer them on to somebody else. And that's okay, because not everybody necessarily knows until you get into it. So the important thing is to start bringing value as soon as you can in that relationship and making sure that it's going to work out, because the proposal phase is not necessarily when you're going to find out the most things about the client. You won't really find out a lot about them until you start working together. And that's where you can firm up that relationship and have a good understanding of how both of you work.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing that internally, with you guys working together, that the relationship that you have with the staff on your team, that they have with each other, is probably reflective of this as well, right? Like, I'm guessing you have a very kind of honest and, personally, I hope that every agency has honesty internally between their staff, but I'd love to hear how this translates to your interactions that aren't with the client.
Yeah, for sure. So we work in one big room, like most agencies. We actually moved into a bigger office space recently. And now we have rooms with doors. Before we were in a loft space. And so if I was doing, for example, recording a podcast, I would have to go into one of the washrooms and that would be where I'd be recording for the afternoon. Now we have actual rooms for recording. It's much better. But part of it, because we were in this one big room, it means that, of course, we all hear everything that's going on. And so headphones are kind of mandatory, but we're also all on Slack all day. And I think part of our communication style is that everybody also is interested in really different things. We're not all the same kind of people. A couple of us are super into football, for example, and fantasy football, and some of us are 0% interested in sports. One of our designers keeps up on the royal family and keeps us up on the royal family. As a result, it's not something I necessarily am interested in, but Sarah's super passionate about it, and I really like that she has this hobby that she's super interested in. And I think that that's something where it's really cool to hear about these other facets of my coworkers and what they do and how that brings interest to their lives and their job. And I think that that's where, particularly when you're hiring, obviously you want to hire for skill, but you should also hire for your ability to get along with someone. And by getting along with them, it doesn't mean you guys have to be best friends. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the same interests, Star Wars versus Star Trek, or any of the ridiculous culture fit questions that sometimes people ask. It's more along the lines of, can I go on a flight with you? Are you going to drive me crazy, or are you interesting, and can we actually have a conversation? And I think that's something that's really important to find in the people that you hire and that you work with.
Absolutely. It's like the barbecue test. I know one of my own mentors over the years, one thing that he always asks is, would you be happy to have your clients with you at a barbecue? And not just your clients. He does do it in the context of clients, but I would ask myself that with staff as well. I'm like, how interested would I be in actually hanging out with them?
Yeah, well, because you see them every day, you probably see them more than you see your spouse. So you should probably make sure you get along with them okay when you're choosing who you're going to hire.
Yeah, just the little things like that. Yeah, this is all super, super fascinating and awesome. I'd love to hear a little bit more. How has this, because it sounds like right now where you're at, you have some pretty good policies internally, externally. It sounds like your communication is doing really well. I'd love to know, how has the way that you communicate, both with staff and with clients, how has that evolved over time? Has it evolved kind of informally? Have you had to put some processes in place? Have you run into some challenges that have made this sort of thing really obvious? I'd love to just hear a bit more about your journey.
Yeah, let's see. Well, with clients in particular, for sure, we've evolved in terms of how we deliver items to clients, particularly because a lot of it revolves around training. So, for example, we will build a social media guide on what they should be doing on social, and we'll sit down with them and we'll train them. And then it comes to them actually doing. And this is something actually where I feel like, and my business partner, Jen, would totally agree with me, that we're not 100% there, we think, in the delivery system, but we don't think that actually anybody is necessarily doing a great job of delivering training well in a way that people can use it in an ongoing fashion. So that's something for sure that we are trying to solve is how can we get clients more engaged? Because some clients really take to it and they're super engaged, and other clients really struggle with it. And so, how can we better meet what we're delivering to that particular client's learning style? And things like internally, for example, obviously Slack has been a pretty amazing invention. We used HipChat before Slack came out, and then we made the switch. And having an internal chat is fantastic, especially for, work from home, because we have a pretty strict, we're all in one big room. If you're not feeling well, you're working from home policy. And I think it's great that people feel that they can just work from home and not feel like they have to show up. We hate that whole presenteeism idea. You have to be there and just show up even if you're not working, and try to be flexible with things like work schedules. So, for example, we have one employee who comes in at 7:30 and leaves at 3:30 because she likes to get up in the mornings. Good for her, but then and we try not to bug her after hours unless something horrible happens, but typically there's no marketing emergencies. So really trying to be flexible, and there isn't necessarily a written policy on things like timeshare. So that's one of the things is we've made the decision to stay small. And that means that we don't necessarily need to write out a 30-page manual, but often a lot of things that we'll approach with is just, be an adult about this. Don't take advantage. And we found that the employees that haven't worked out with us in the long run are the employees who can't be an adult about something and do try to take advantage. And that's not something that's cool. And then we end up ending our relationship with them. The other types of employees that haven't worked out are the ones who don't have a good grasp of their own capabilities. And that's been really interesting, where someone has oversold their ability. Rarely do people undersell, but certainly, where you've oversold your ability and then you realize you've oversold your ability, but then you refuse to accept that you've oversold your ability. That's definitely a struggle. And that's been something that we've really watched for in our hiring process as well, because we've been burned by that in the past.
Okay. And how do you screen for these types of things? You say you watch for it in your hiring process. Is this something that, overselling, there are levels that you can do. There's things you can do, like giving a free test or just checking references, those sorts of things.
Hmm.
But people who, for example, are trying to take advantage of the flexibility, is that something that you have been able to successfully screen for? Or is that something that, just makes itself apparent within the first period of after they get hired?
Yeah, I think it makes itself apparent, absolutely. But now that we've had that happen a couple times, we know what to watch for. And I think that's made it easier for us to capture that. And part of it, too, is definitely personal referrals. So, for example, we just hired an office administrator, and she came to us because she was working for a friend of my business partners. And unfortunately, they weren't, they have a seasonal business, so they weren't able to keep working with her through the winter. But she came highly recommended. So that is a great, referral for us. And that absolutely having that kind of relationship where you know somebody and you're not just hiring cold can really help things out. And I know, especially if you have a remote agency, you may not always be able to do this, but certainly call those references, talk to the people who've worked with the person you're thinking of hiring, take the time. Doing things like taking someone out to a lunch and things like that aren't necessarily the best way to gauge their behavior because, they're obviously going to be on their best behavior. You have to talk to people who've worked with them in the past. And of course, legally watch out the stuff you ask for. You can't always ask all the things you might want to ask, but certainly understanding how they answer questions and what sorts of referrals you've been given can say a lot about your applicant as well when you're going through that hiring process.
I was definitely typing a few notes there. I think that
Yeah, I don't think enough people call references. I don't know why, or at least email references if you can't call them. And I think that that's something that's so important to do. And certainly when we've looked back and been like, oh, we made a bad hiring decision, we didn't call references. Why not? Yeah. So that's certainly shown to us that we need to do that.
I will definitely be putting a lot more effort into references because I'm definitely guilty of that. Sometimes you just get so excited talking to someone, you're like, oh yeah, it must be great. So definitely the takeaway I'm getting there is do your homework. It's more important to gauge their behavior from others who have worked with them than from, how they're behaving while they're on their best behavior. But I'd like to just go back. There was something that you mentioned about Slack that I was just curious to hear a bit more about. Do you ever find that the open communication of platform of Slack ever does that fit comfortably within your process, or do people end up getting caught up in conversations or jumping more official, let's say, like processes to communicate via Slack? Do you find this all positive, or are there ever any setbacks? Because sometimes I hear from agencies that Slack can be kind of iffy in terms of adding to productivity versus taking away from it.
Yeah, and I think agencies don't necessarily have a realistic view of productivity. Let's be honest, all of us probably have 4 or 5 hours of honest, focused work in us on a daily basis, and the rest of that time is spent emails and the water cooler, which is Slack, essentially. And I think it's okay to accept that you're not necessarily going to get, 8 billable hours out of someone in a day. That's a recipe for burnout. And I think that that's important to just accept. Certainly for us, our expectation is that 4 to 5 hours. And I think that that's where Slack really fits in. And what's nice about Slack is that it is asynchronous. Yeah, sometimes we'll use the @here or @channel to get everyone's attention if something is really important. But certainly a lot of the time, it's just jump into this conversation when you have time, particularly for things like, our goof off room. We have one room called 911 Celebrity News, which is just obviously for just celebrity news. And that is not an urgent room for anybody, but sometimes when people are taking a break and it's important to take a brain break, go in there and waste a little time and talk about something, some sort of celebrity scandal or whatever you want to chat about, or music or whatever it might be. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's important for agencies to understand that you've hired human beings, not robots, and people need time, they need downtime, they need brain break time. And sometimes you can get inspired too by the stuff that you see. Even going to a show, which I feel like has done advertising a bit of disservice, Mad Men, he would go off and watch movies, and that would be where inspiration would come from. And I think something like that is really important to do, especially if you're in a creative role as part of your process, is just fooling around on the internet and seeing what's out there. And sometimes that can lead to some unexpected discoveries.
This is really good. I think this is really circling back to what you were saying earlier which is that part of what has made communication within your team so successful is that you do have these relationships that go beyond work. You do know, I mean, even offhand, you knew several of the different people on your team, what they're passionate about, what's going on. I think this is something that sometimes can be, as you mentioned, a little bit more challenging in remote settings where you're purely remote, which is as we are. I'm currently in a small town in the middle of nowhere, and the closest worker to me is quite a ways away. So have you had to, do you find that just organically, if you have the right people, you're getting those 4 or 5 hours of work, or have you found that, the people who take advantage, are they the people that you mentioned before? They really make themselves known really quickly.
Yeah, I really think they do. And I mean, yeah, we are at an advantage because we're small. There's 8 of us. We aren't probably going to go past 10 agency-wise. I've heard from many agency owners that between 10 and 20 is really the hard part. And I like what I do, and I don't want to do the hard part. So we're fine with staying small, and I like that. But if you're actually thinking about learning from an agency who does remote and does it extremely well, there's an agency called Upbuild, and their website is upbuild.io. And I think that they really do a fantastic job of doing remote. My friend Mike Arneson started it, and I just really admire his blog and his ethos that he's brought to the company. And if you are interested in building a remote team, I would really recommend checking that site out.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I know we too, not only do we have a remote team, but we too are very enamored of staying small. We currently have 5 people, and we're not really planning on growing too large beyond that. So upbuild.io, did you say that was?
Yep, absolutely. And I'm just checking their team page now. They're at 10 people now. So I'm not sure how far Mike wants to take it, but he has written several blog posts on running a remote team, and they're very honest and introspective. And I do recommend, although he's in the digital, they do technical marketing support. I would really recommend checking out that site because his insights on working with a remote team I find are stellar.
Excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to check it out, and we'll add it in the show notes as well, although it's pretty simple to type into your browser. So this has been really great. We're just going to start winding down a little bit more here. Before I get into, I have a few kind of quick lightning round style questions. But before I get into that, I'd love to ask, is there anything that you wish I had asked but didn't?
Oh, geez. I always hate these kinds of questions because I could talk about lots of different stuff. I don't know. I think definitely the part where we talk about internal agency stuff, I don't think enough people talk about that. And I think that's something that, particularly if you've never worked in an agency, for example, let's say you've worked in a large organization and you've decided to go out on your own and hang out your own shingle and do your own thing, it's really difficult to know what is good and what isn't because, social media, everyone's Instagram is awesome all the time, #agency life. And so it's really difficult to get to know the inner workings. And I think that this is where it's very important to surround yourself with people who are also doing this, that you can have these conversations with. And I think that's something that's really helpful, especially for me, is that because I do travel a lot to conferences and I do a lot of speaking engagements, I do have, I jokingly call them my search friends from the search marketing circuit of talks. And I see them all the time. And many of them own agencies or high level employees at those agencies. And we certainly share, client struggles and discussions that's going on. And I think it's really valuable to have that kind of support network. So try to make that happen no matter where you are.
Okay, and do you have any suggestions for people who would like, because I agree with you 150%. I think a real game changer for me and us in our industry was not just when we started to make those connections, but honestly, when we started to be willing to be vulnerable about what we're struggling with and ask questions about more about the inner workings. So let's say if somebody is, maybe is dealing with their family at home and travel isn't really the best thing for them. Do you have any other suggestions for how they might connect to that community?
Yeah, and actually Slack, again, is really useful for this. There's lots of Slack groups that have been set up for different discussion areas, and I think that all of them have a sort of social water cooler aspect to them. So, go out there, start to build your network on places like Twitter and LinkedIn, and see what Slack groups exist. So, for example, there's one called Measure, which is specifically about reporting and measurement, which I find really useful. I know there's one for women in search. So there's lots of different Slack groups out there. You just have to find one that works for you. There's also lots of Twitter chats that happen as well, particularly in digital marketing. So, for example, there's a local SEO chat, there's a PPC chat. So again, find a chat that's relevant to the topic you're super interested in, and you get to know these people over time, which is awesome.
Okay, awesome. Great insight. I have checked out Slack groups a little bit, but Not a ton. I also like doing Facebook groups. I find that, well, Facebook is the black hole. It can be dangerous, but it can also be really good if, you have, shall we say, curated your feed to bring up things that are positively reinforcing for you. Okay, are you ready for a few rapid fire questions?
Yeah, hit me.
Okay, awesome. So, what is the number one thing that you do to preserve and encourage your wellness?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, this is not a lightning answer. I don't talk about this very much, actually, but I recently finally pursued a diagnosis for ADD, which I've had, my whole life, and I've suspected I've had it, but I've never been diagnosed. And this is actually quite common for women because women don't present with the same sort of symptoms that men do when it comes to ADD. So, women, if you think you have this, go and talk to a medical professional. When I started on medication for it, I think almost 2 years ago now, it has been life-changing. So frankly, wellness was actually sitting down and dealing with stuff that I've always suspected was a problem, but didn't actually get up and deal with it and just deal with it, honestly.
That I think that's excellent insight. I mean, we have a lot of focus on different habits that you can bring into your life to preserve your wellness, and those are great. Definitely not trying to put any of those down. But I think as entrepreneurs, we sometimes run the risk of putting problems that might be a little bit deeper or a little bit more ongoing on the back burner. So, really deserve and respect for taking the time to look in that mirror and pursue solutions. So,
Yeah, and I mean, a routine will only take you so far, right? If there's an underlying major issue that you're ignoring, you just have to suck it up and deal with it, honestly.
totally agree. Okay, next question. What is the weirdest thing that contributes to your success?
Man, sometimes I think it's my age. I don't know. As I get older, I've been on the internet for a long time now. The internet came out, like the first web browser came out in my first year of university, and I've been really dedicated to it since then. I think having this I refer to it as, the institutional knowledge of just being around on the internet for a long time is actually really helpful to explain some of the weird quirks of how we do things now. So, for example, one of our newer employees is learning technical audits, and she'll ask me a question, why is this called this? And I'm like, oh, right. Well, in 2004, blah, blah, blah. Right. And it's because of this long history of weird stuff on the internet that's happened. And so I actually think that my breadth of experience is one of the most valuable assets that I have, that I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and it helps me avoid some of the pitfalls that I may have seen already.
Okay, excellent. And last lightning round question. What is the thing that you most enjoy doing on your time off?
I actually am an avid collector of Lego. So that's what I spend my time doing a lot. On my time off, I have a little hobby store where I sell extra Lego for fun. And it's actually fun because it's a silly little business. I don't need to turn it into a big thing. It's just something that I do when I have excess Lego. I sell it on a site called Bricklink. And and so that's really fun to just play with Lego, honestly.
That's really awesome. I have another colleague and agency partner named Gretchen of Left Right Labs who is super into Lego,
hmm
and it's yeah. Anyway, it takes me back to my childhood. I always struggled as a kid because Lego was supposed to be the boy thing, and so I'd be like, oh, I want Lego, I love Lego, and then they'd be like, no, your brother gets all the Lego.
Yeah, and I think honestly, being born when I was, Lego wasn't quite a boy thing when I was a kid. It got turned into a boy thing later on, so I got in early enough that it was not something that was expected for boys. And I actually think definitely for all my nieces and nephews, we always buy them Lego for Christmas and holidays and birthdays. And certainly, I mean, one our niece is super into the Friends line, which I actually think is really fun for little girls who might have been socialized that, pink is your color and your princesses and all that stuff. And I think the Friends line is really cool for that. And I appreciate that Lego is, I don't necessarily like the gendering of it, but I do like that Lego is putting out something so that girls can also get into Lego without thinking it's a boy's toy.
That is the lightning round. I'd love it if you could tell the audience, if they're interested in finding out more about you, where they can check out, some of the awesome stuff that you've done, or if they're interested in Kickpoint, how can they find you online?
Yeah, so the Kickpoint website is just kickpoint.ca, not .com, because we're in Canada. We have a newsletter that goes out every Friday, and it includes 3 articles of interesting things that are happening in the digital marketing industry, a music pick from our design director, and something cute, as well as a few fun little links here and there, stuff like rebrands we usually toss in there. So you can sign up for that on our website. It's in the footer of every page, or you can go to kickpoint.ca/newsletter to sign up. I'm on Twitter, although to be honest, I use it less and less. I find that it can be a bit of a time suck, but you can always follow me on Twitter because when I do tweet, I make sure it's something good, or add me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing. It has been excellent to get to know you better. Honestly, I feel like we could have a whole other discussion about your newsletter and the interesting mix of things you just shared. You add something cute, but maybe we'll save that for another time. If you're willing to chat again sometime.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Awesome. So thank you, Dana. If you're interested in hearing more about Dana, connecting with her, connecting with Kickpoint, totally encourage you to go to those links or connect with her on LinkedIn or Twitter. And thank you so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of Say It Online. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.